Black Death, also known as the Bubonic Plague, struck Europe in 1347. Originating in Central Asia, it traveled along trade routes carried by fleas on black rats that infested merchant ships. By the time it reached Europe, it had transformed into a pandemic of unimaginable proportions. The disease caused symptoms that were as horrifying as they were deadly: painful, swollen lymph nodes called buboes, high fever, vomiting, and dark, gangrenous spots on the skin. Death often came within days. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death killed an estimated 25 million people in Europe, about a third of the continent's population. Entire towns were wiped out, farms were abandoned, and the social fabric of medieval life unraveled. Beyond the physical toll, the Black Death left a psychological scar. Fear and paranoia gripped the population. Some believed the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins, leading to flagellant movements, groups of people who whipped themselves in penance. About 150 miles north of London lies the village of Eyam, nestled in the rolling hills of Derbyshire. In 1665, this small, tight-knit community faced its own plague outbreak, brought to the village through an ordinary bundle of cloth. The cloth, sent from London to a local tailor, was infested with fleas carrying the deadly plague. George Vickers was the journeyman tailor, skilled in his craft and well-liked in the community. But shortly after receiving the cloth, he began to feel unwell. What started as chills and fever quickly escalated into excruciating pain and swollen lymph nodes. Signs of the bubonic plague. Within days, George Vickers succumbed to the illness. His death sent shockwaves through the village. At first, the residents hoped it was an isolated incident, a stroke of misfortune. But their hopes were short-lived. As news of Vickers' death spread, fear began to grip the village. The plague was a distant nightmare for many, a horror they had only heard about from London. Now, it was at their doorstep. Before long, the disease began to spread. Those who had been in contact with George Vickers, friends, neighbors, even customers, started showing symptoms. The plague did not discriminate. It struck down the young and old, rich and poor alike. The once thriving village was now gripped by silence, broken only by the toll of the church bell announcing yet another death. Entire families perished, their homes left empty. By the autumn of 1665, the plague had taken hold of the village and its survival seemed uncertain. With no cure and the death toll rising, the villagers faced a stark choice: stay and fight the plague, or flee and risk spreading it to neighboring communities. Amid this chaos, William Mompesson, the village rector, emerged as a voice of reason. Newly appointed to Eyam, Mompesson was an outsider, yet he quickly realized the gravity of the situation. He understood that if the villagers fled, they risked spreading the plague to the surrounding region, potentially causing thousands more deaths. However, Mompesson faced a challenge. Many in the village were distrustful of him, partly because of his recent arrival, but also because of the ongoing religious tensions in England. Eyam had been a Puritan stronghold, and Mompesson represented the Church of England. That's where Thomas Stanley, the former rector of Eyam, came into the picture. Though no longer the official leader of the village, Stanley was deeply respected by the Puritan majority. Despite their theological differences, Mompesson reached out to Stanley, knowing that the village needed a united front to face the crisis. Together, these two men set aside their religious differences and joined forces. Their goal was clear: to convince the villagers to stay and quarantine themselves, even if it meant sacrificing their own lives. On a warm summer day, the villagers gathered in the church to hear what Mompesson and Stanley had to say. The two men stood side by side, a powerful symbol of unity. They explained the deadly nature of the plague and how it spread through contact and proximity. Their words struck a chord. While the decision was heart-wrenching, the villagers began to see the greater good in self-isolation. They agreed to quarantine the village to prevent the plague from spreading to surrounding communities. The quarantine was not a simple matter. Mompesson and Stanley worked together to establish strict rules. Boundary stones were placed around the village to mark the limits of the quarantine, and no one was allowed to cross them. Food and supplies were delivered by nearby towns, left at the boundary stones in exchange for coins that had been disinfected in vinegar. Church services were held outdoors to reduce the risk of infection, and families were encouraged to bury their own dead to prevent further spread of the disease. The decision to quarantine was a heavy burden. The villagers knew that many of them would not survive, but they also knew their actions would save countless lives in the surrounding region. Over the course of the quarantine, nearly 260 of Eyam's 350 residents perished, but life during the quarantine was far from easy. Isolation took a heavy toll on the villagers, both mentally and emotionally. Families were confined to their homes, cut off from neighbors and friends. The streets grew eerily quiet, filled only with the sounds of grief and fear. Many turned to journaling or prayer to cope with the overwhelming sense of loss. Others found solace in simple routines, tending to gardens, sewing, or crafting small items to distract themselves from the grim reality outside their doors. The emotional burden was compounded by the constant presence of death. Entire families perished, leaving homes empty and hearts broken. Yet the villagers persisted, holding on to the hope that their sacrifice would save lives beyond Eyam. The quarantine lasted for over 14 months. During that time, Eyam endured every season, from the scorching heat of summer to the bitter chill of winter. Each new day brought both hope and dread as the villagers waited for the plague to run its course. Eyam began the quarantine with a population of around 350 people, though some estimates suggest it could have been as high as 800. By the time the plague had run its course, over 75% of the villagers were dead. Out of 350, only 83 survived. Some families were entirely wiped out, leaving no one to remember their names. In some cases, entire generations perished within weeks. The village became a patchwork of grief, with nearly every household bearing loved ones. The statistics are staggering, but behind every number is a story of heartbreak. Take the Hancock family, for example. Elizabeth Hancock buried 6 of her children and her husband within 8 days, digging their graves herself to avoid infecting anyone else. Elizabeth showed extraordinary strength, but the loss she endured was unfathomable. By the time the quarantine ended, she was one of the few left standing. Then there was Mary Cooper, who lost her husband and all her children within the span of weeks. Alone and with no family left to comfort her, she became a living testament to the pain and resilience of Eyam. Eyam's self-imposed quarantine wasn't just a local tragedy. It was a heroic act that saved countless lives in the surrounding communities. Villages like Bakewell and Tideswell were spared the horrors of the plague because Eyam's residents refused to leave, even when it meant their own demise. Had the disease spread beyond Eyam, the entire region could have been devastated. By choosing to isolate themselves, the villagers acted as a human shield, containing the outbreak at the cost of their own lives. Eyam's legacy extends far beyond the plague. It stands as a testament to the strength of human spirit, to the courage of a community that, in the face of unimaginable fear and loss, chose to act for the greater good. Their decision wasn't easy, facing a deadly disease, isolation, and the fear of never seeing loved ones again, but they knew their actions would save others. The Eyam Museum, located in the heart of the village, offers a glimpse into life during the plague, with displays of artifacts, personal stories, and accounts of the villagers' heroic actions. The boundary stones marking the limits of the quarantine still stand today, silent witnesses to the incredible resolve of the Eyam community. Through their actions, the people of Eyam showed us what it means to act with love and compassion, even in the face of impossible odds. Their story is a reminder that, even in the darkest times, there is light in the choices we make, in the community we build, and in the sacrifices we offer for others.